There are wounds that cut deeper than any knife, wounds not inflicted by strangers, but by the very people who should have been our greatest source of safety and respect. One of the most painful truths of family life is this: sometimes a son humiliates his father. And when that happens, it does not simply fracture the family bond. It exposes one of the darkest corners of the human psyche. Why would a son, the very child a father raised, protected, and sacrificed for, turn that love into scorn? Why would he mock, belittle, or degrade the man who gave him life? Carl Jung believed the answer lies far beneath the surface, in the unconscious forces that quietly shape our relationships. When we speak of humiliation here, we are not talking about a single moment of anger or a heated argument. Those happen in every family. We are talking about a repeated pattern, a systematic stripping away of dignity. A son who humiliates his father is not only attacking the man before him, but also wrestling with the unresolved shadow within himself. Jung taught us that the father, in the psyche of a son, is more than flesh and blood. He is an archetype, the embodiment of authority, power, protection, and also limitation. The father represents not only strength, but the rules that once confined the boy. And so when the son grows older, especially when he feels trapped in unresolved emotions, he may begin to rebel. The tragedy is that this rebellion does not create freedom. Instead, it often leads to cruelty. Imagine a boy who grows up under the heavy presence of a demanding father. He admires him, fears him, even resents him, but he never fully expresses those emotions. As an adult, the unspoken turns into aggression. He humiliates his father not because he feels indifferent, but because he is still too entangled. The emotions that were never voiced now explode in a destructive form. This becomes especially evident when the father grows older. A man who once carried his family on strong shoulders begins to weaken. Age, illness, or retirement changes the balance of power. The son, now stronger and more independent, suddenly sees himself above the man he once depended on. But instead of compassion, he often feels unconscious revenge. The humiliation he inflicts is a way of punishing his father for years of dominance or for needs that were never met. Jung revealed a painful truth. We often attack in others what we cannot bear in ourselves. When a son mocks his father's vulnerability, he is also mocking his own hidden fears of weakness. When he ridicules his father's failures, he is really fighting the parts of himself that feel inadequate. Every cruel word becomes a projection. The father becomes a mirror, reflecting back the son's unresolved shame. Freud would add that repression fuels this fire. A son repressed the softer emotions, love, gratitude, dependency, because they feel too threatening. To admit them would make him feel small, vulnerable, still like a child. So instead of acknowledging love, he buries it. But what is buried does not disappear. It returns in disguise, often as anger, resentment, or humiliation. Picture this. A son rolls his eyes at his aging father's advice. He interrupts him, mocks his outdated views, dismisses his stories as irrelevant. On the surface, it seems like arrogance, but beneath it lies fear, the fear of becoming like him. The son humiliates his father as if, by degrading him, he could distance himself from the destiny he dreads. But here is the bitter irony. Every attack on the father is also an attack on the son himself. To humiliate the man who raised you is to humiliate the roots from which you came. No matter how much distance is created, the bond cannot be erased. And so the cruelty becomes a vicious cycle that deepens the son's inner wounds. The father, too, plays a role in this tragic dance. Some fathers struggle to let go of authority. Even when their sons are grown men, they continue to treat them as children, undermining their independence. Other fathers may have been emotionally absent, and their sons carry lifelong resentment for the love they never received. Jung reminds us that destructive relationships are rarely one-sided. Both parties contribute, often unconsciously, to the dynamic. Still, the humiliation of the father reveals a profound psychological struggle. The fear of individuation. Individuation in Jung's terms is the process of becoming one's true self, separate, whole, authentic. For a son, that means moving beyond the father's shadow without denying his influence. But when individuation fails, the son becomes stuck in a rebellion that should have ended in adolescence. He humiliates his father not to free himself, but because he is never truly separated in a healthy way. The father then becomes a tragic figure. After years of sacrifice, he faces scorn instead of respect. Yet sometimes he unconsciously reinforces the cycle. By clinging to authority or demanding obedience, he fuels the resentment. By never showing his own vulnerability in a healthy way, he leaves his son unable to reconcile strength with compassion. So why does this matter? Because these patterns are not only about fathers and sons. They are about us all. They reveal how unresolved emotions shape our closest bonds, how the shadow of the past can poison the present, and how love can twist into hate when left unexamined. The painful truth, as Jung taught, is this: when a son humiliates his father, he is fighting not just the man, but the parts of himself he has not yet accepted. Healing begins only when both father and son acknowledge their humanity, the strength and the weakness, the pride and the pain, and perhaps when the son can look at his father not as an enemy to defeat, but as a man with his own wounds and limitations. The cycle of humiliation can finally end. Respect begins within. A man who cannot respect himself will struggle to respect anyone else, especially his own father. And when a father fails to set boundaries or hides behind silence and denial, he unintentionally raises a son who sees weakness where strength should have been. Here, in this tragic dynamic, the unconscious forces of the human psyche reveal themselves. Both father and son are trapped in patterns they do not see, yet continue to repeat. The son grows into manhood fighting against an image of his father that may no longer even exist. The father still loves his son, but his love is often interpreted as weakness, as failure, as not enough. What follows is humiliation, resentment, and rebellion. This destructive cycle rarely begins with one generation. Sons who humiliate their fathers often witness the same behavior within their family lineage. Perhaps they saw their grandfather belittle their father, or perhaps their father himself never learned what self-respect truly means. Trauma and dysfunction move silently from father to son like an inherited script. Unless the cycle is broken, it plays out again and again. Carl Jung understood this well. He spoke of the unconscious patterns that shape us, the shadow, the archetypes, the deep complexes that drive behavior. A son who humiliates his father is often fighting against more than just the man in front of him. He is battling with his own unintegrated shadow, the parts of himself he cannot accept. Why does this happen? One painful reason lies in what psychologists call the narcissistic wound. As a boy becomes a man, he is confronted with his own fears, weaknesses, and shortcomings. The father becomes a mirror to these vulnerabilities. He has seen the son in his most fragile moments, crying as a child, failing, doubting himself, depending on another. For a man desperate to appear strong and invulnerable, this witness feels unbearable. The father's very presence becomes a threat to the son's fragile self-image. Jung would describe this as the tension between persona and shadow. The persona is the mask a man wears before the world, confident, powerful, untouchable. The shadow is everything he rejects: weakness, fear, vulnerability. The father embodies this shadow because he holds the memory of the son's dependent, helpless side. Humiliating the father becomes, unconsciously, a way to destroy the evidence of his own vulnerability. But cultural expectations deepen this wound. In Western society, men are often pressured to be independent, unemotional, and stoic. Expressing love or admiration for one's father can be mocked as weakness. Instead, sons learn to assert themselves by pushing their fathers down, confusing cruelty with strength, disrespect with autonomy. This painful pattern often reveals itself when the father ages. As he grows weaker, ill or dependent, his vulnerability confronts the son with his own mortality. Rather than accept this truth, the son lashes out. He projects his fear of aging and death onto his father, blaming him for what is, in fact, the universal human condition. Freud once said that we hate most in others what we fear in ourselves. And here it is. The son humiliates his father because he cannot face his own weakness. Jung insisted that integration of the shadow is essential for maturity. The son who humiliates his father has failed to make peace with his own inner contradictions. He remains stuck in an adolescent stage where every sign of weakness must be attacked, not embraced. True growth requires courage, the courage to accept that strength and vulnerability can exist side by side. Society, however, often fails to teach men this balance. Many grow up without learning how to care, nurture, or offer emotional support. When the aging father finally needs care, the son feels overwhelmed and powerless. Instead of stepping into maturity, he blames his father for needing help. Humiliation becomes his defense against responsibility. Modern life only makes the distance worse. Sons move far away, preoccupied with careers and families of their own. Phone calls go unanswered, visits delayed, messages ignored. Technology, instead of fostering connection, becomes a weapon of silent humiliation. The father is left in uncertainty and quiet suffering. Behind this lies what Jung called the father complex. Some sons remain so entangled with their fathers that they never fully form their own identity. Others swing to the opposite extreme, rejecting anything paternal as suffocating. In both cases, the relationship lacks balance. The son has never learned how to be both connected and autonomous, how to respect his father while still claiming his own independence. The tragedy is this. Humiliation often escalates at the very moment the father needs compassion most. Instead of becoming the mature man who can honor both his father and himself, the son stays locked in rebellion, mistaking aggression for freedom. The cycle continues until one generation chooses differently. Healing requires both father and son to face their shadows, to confront the pain they inherited, and to choose respect where humiliation once lived. Only then can the destructive chain be broken, and a deeper, more authentic bond take root. A father is often seen as a figure of authority, strength, and protection. Yet in many families, the bond between father and son turns into a battlefield of humiliation and resentment. Behind this painful reality lies not just individual choices, but unconscious forces that Carl Jung described as shadows, parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or project onto others. When a son humiliates his father, it is rarely about the father alone. It is a tragic reflection of wounds carried deep within the son's psyche. For many men, the father becomes both a model and an obstacle. He represents the authority the son wants to surpass, and the weakness the son fears will define him. As boys, sons look up to their fathers, but as men, they often judge them harshly. If the father fails to embody strength, discipline, or success, the son begins to see him not as a guide, but as a failure. Every shortcoming of the father feels like a mirror reflecting the son's own hidden doubts. Humiliation then becomes a weapon, an unconscious attempt to destroy the reflection of his own weakness. This destructive cycle is rarely born in one generation. It is often passed down, like an inheritance no one asked for. A son who humiliates his father may have witnessed his grandfather belittle his father. These behaviors sink into the unconscious mind, becoming learned scripts for how men relate to one another. Jung called this the power of complexes, patterns of thought and behavior that trap us until we bring them into the light. One painful reason for this humiliation lies in what psychologists call the narcissistic wound. As a boy grows, he realizes his father has seen him in moments of helplessness, failure, and fear. For a man desperate to project strength and independence, this memory is unbearable. the father becomes a living witness to his vulnerability. Instead of embracing that truth, the son lashes out, attacking the very person who holds the evidence of his fragile self. Jung explained this through the tension between persona and shadow. The persona is the mask we show the world, confident, in control, strong. The shadow holds the parts of ourselves we reject, fear, dependency, and weakness. The father embodies the shadow for the son because he remembers him not as the persona he wants to be, but as the vulnerable boy he once was. By humiliating his father, the son unconsciously tries to destroy the reminder of his own shadow. Culture deepens this wound. In modern Western society, men are expected to be independent, stoic, and emotionally distant. To express love or admiration for one's father can be seen as weakness. Instead, sons often try to prove manhood through dominance. They confuse cruelty with strength and disrespect with autonomy. Humiliation becomes a distorted performance of masculinity. This becomes especially cruel when the father grows old. Illness, weakness, or retirement strip away the mask of authority. The father becomes frail, reminding the son of his own mortality. Instead of compassion, many sons respond with rejection. By humiliating the father, the son projects his fear of aging and death onto him. Freud noted that we often hate in others what we fear in ourselves. In this sense, humiliating the father becomes a way of escaping the terror of one's own decline. Yet Jung believed healing is possible. It begins with integrating the shadow, facing one's fears rather than projecting them. A son must learn that true strength does not lie in humiliating his father, but in confronting his own vulnerability with honesty. To recognize that fear, weakness, and dependence are not signs of failure, but part of the human condition. Fathers, too, have a role to play. Many unknowingly allow the cycle by failing to set emotional boundaries or by tolerating disrespect in silence. A father who builds his entire identity around being obeyed often collapses when challenged. But a father who learns to embody self-respect and maturity can break the cycle by modeling a different kind of strength, one rooted in dignity rather than domination. The bitter truth is that healing requires courage from both sides. The son must acknowledge that his cruelty is not proof of strength but evidence of inner weakness. The father must admit that his silence, denial, or lack of boundaries may have allowed the cycle to continue. These realizations are painful, but they are the first step toward freedom. When father and son face these truths, a new relationship becomes possible, one built not on humiliation, but on mutual respect and autonomy. Jung reminded us that the greatest treasures lie hidden in the darkest places of the psyche. The painful dynamic of father and son can also be the doorway to deep transformation. The humiliation that now feels like an unbridgeable divide can become the starting point of growth. If the son learns compassion without losing strength, and the father learns dignity without losing control, both can step into the shadow. What once was a battlefield can become the ground for understanding. The question then is not simply why sons humiliate their fathers. The real question is how fathers and sons can find the courage to break free of unconscious patterns. Healing does not lie in blame, but in awareness. Behind every act of cruelty lies a wounded soul, longing for healing. If this exploration of why sons humiliate their fathers has resonated with you, take a moment to reflect and share your own thoughts in the comments below. Your experiences and insights can help others on their journey of understanding and healing. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives into Carl Jung's wisdom. Together we can break cycles and build stronger, more conscious connections.